is a document written on clay, discovered almost intact among the ruins of the ancient city of Nibar in modern-day Iraq at the beginning of 20th century. At first it looks ordinary, a list of kings, name after name, city after city, how long they ruled, who replaced them, the kind of bureaucratic record you would expect from a serious civilization. But then you start reading the numbers. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, length of reign 28,800 years. The second king, Alalngar, 36,000 years. And it continues. The first 8 kings, all said to have ruled before a great flood swept across the world, governed for a combined total of 241,000 years. Then the flood comes, and after the flood, the numbers begin to shrink. Hundreds of years, then decades, then something that starts to feel almost human. The document is known today as the Sumerian King List, and for more than a century, archaeologists, historians, and linguists have argued over what it actually means. Because the people who wrote this were not primitive storytellers scribbling random myths into clay. They built one of the earliest systems of writing in human history. They developed advanced mathematics. They organized cities, trade, astronomy, and law. So when they wrote 28,000 years, they knew exactly what they were writing. The question is, what did they mean? The Sumerian King List is not a single artifact. More than 20 different versions have been discovered across Mesopotamia, scattered today between museums in Oxford, Chicago, Baghdad, and beyond. The most famous version is known as the Weld-Blundell Prism, a 4-sided clay prism currently housed in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. It was written around 1800 BC, only 20 centimeters tall, but carved into its 4 sides is a timeline stretching from the beginning of kingship to the era in which the scribe himself lived. Its structure is remarkably consistent. A king, a city, a length of reign, again and again. Writing using the Sumerian numerical system based on 60. Before the flood, 8 kings, 5 cities, Eridu, Batibira, Larak, Sipar, Sulpak. The shortest reign lasts 18,600 years, the longest 43,200. But after the flood, something changed. The number collapsed dramatically. The first post-flood kings ruled for centuries, then decades, then ordinary lifespans. And this is where the mystery deepens. Some rule listed in the latter section, including Gilgamesh of Uruk, also appear in independent Mesopotamian source, which means at least part of the document is connected to people who may have actually existed. And if the latter portions contain echoes of real history, what exactly are we looking at in the beginning? There are 3 major explanations for the impossible numbers in the pre-flood section of the King List. None of them are perfect, and all of them leave uncomfortable questions behind. The first explanation is the simplest: mythology. According to this view, the enormous land were never meant to be taken literally. The numbers are symbolic, a way of telling the reader that the earliest kings belonged to a sacred age, closer to the gods than to ordinary humans. The larger the number, the greater the divine authority. There are parallels in many ancient traditions. In the book of Genesis, figures like Methuselah are said to live for nearly 1,000 years, not because the text is recording biology, but because extraordinary lifespans represent proximity to a lost and sacred world. The second explanation is mathematical error. Some researchers have proposed that the land may have been mistranslated across different calendar systems. If the unit originally represented months instead of years, then a reign of 28,000 years could shrink into something closer to 200 years. Still unusual, but no longer impossible. The problem is that there is no direct evidence supporting this interpretation in the text itself. The theory is elegant, but speculative. And then there is the third explanation, the most controversial, and perhaps the hardest to completely dismiss. What if the numbers preserve fragment memories from a world the Sumerians themselves no longer fully understood? Not immortal kings, not fantasy, but distorts historical memory. Some alternative research speculate that ancient flood traditions might contain echoes of real catastrophes near the end of the last ice age, when rising seas swallowed coastline and entire settlements disappeared beneath water. There is no definitive evidence linking those events directly to the Sumerian King List, but the idea persists because the structure of the document itself feels strangely transitional, as if the writers were trying to connect two different worlds, one impossibly ancient, one recognizably human, and perhaps that is why the text refuses to disappear. Because no matter which explanation you choose, something about it still feels unresolved. The Sumerian King List is not the kind of document you read once and immediately understand. It is the kind of document that becomes stranger the longer you look at it. And maybe that is the point, not to provide answers, but to preserve memory, a bridge between a world the Sumerians could still faintly remember, and a world already sleeping beyond reach. Because the most interesting thing is not the impossible numbers, it is the fact that the Sumerians believed there was something before them, something older, something greater. The people who built some of the first cities in human history, who developed writing, mathematics, and organized civilization, did not see themselves as the beginning. They saw themselves as survivors, trying to rebuild after something had already been lost. And that feeling is strangely human, even now. They look into the distant past and imagine a greatness that had disappeared beneath the water. We look back at them and wonder the same thing. And maybe one day, far in the future, someone will look back at us that way too.